ever had something or someone that changed your life for the better? Maybe it was something you read or something you heard that made your life more wonderful, and afterwards you felt grateful. I want to share a story with you about something like this, and I'm curious if you can relate. Welcome to English Coach 3Ts. I'm Tanya, and I'll start with this story, and then towards the end of the video, I'll give you some tips on how you can remember what you've learned here today. For me, the story I want to share with you is about learning to be grateful for feeling grateful. And I know that sounds a little strange, but I think you're going to understand more as you hear the story. In the 1990s, I read a book called Simple Abundance by Sarah Van Brethnock. In this book, she talks about a lot of things, but one of the things that stood out for me is how she talked about gratitude. I actually didn't get it the first time I read the book, but one of my friends loved this book so much, I thought I must have missed something, and so I read it again. At about this same time, Oprah Winfrey was talking a lot about gratitude, and this also influenced this story. But to really understand what I'm talking about, you kind of have to go back into my childhood to get the whole story. So let me tell you a little bit about that. As a kid growing up in the United States, of course we celebrated Thanksgiving, and that has changed a lot over time, but that's a story for another day. The part I want to talk about is that, at least for my family, and I think for a lot of families, Thanksgiving really was more about the big turkey dinner than really thinking too much about being thankful or grateful. But for me, as a kid who had experienced some heartbreak around Thanksgiving, because my family Thanksgiving didn't look like everybody else's Thanksgiving, I was encouraged to look at the part where we give thanks or focus on gratitude. I didn't really get it as a kid, and more or less, all that really changed is that once a year I would think of something I was grateful for. As a very young adult, I started to meet people who had more emphasis on the part of Thanksgiving that had to do with gratitude. And I think also at about that time, gratitude started to be talked about more and more in mainstream media. This is about the time that I started watching the Oprah show, and I also read the book Simple Abundance. For me, gratitude had been something that we did once a year, or something that we were told we should do. You should be grateful for this or for that. The concept that Oprah and the Simple Abundance book were teaching me was really quite new for me. Can you think of something in your life like this that changed from the time you were a child to the time that you were adult? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to share a quote with you from each of these people that I think will help to explain what I was learning. So this is from Sarah Van Brethnock, the author of Simple Abundance. She says, "While working to make your dream a reality, feel the joy of accomplishment and savor it with celebration and thanksgiving." I chose this particular quote to help you understand the idea of gratitude and thanksgiving. When we give thanks, we are being thankful. And when we are being thankful, we can also say we're being grateful. I have another video about this, and I'll link it below in case you'd like to watch that one. The other reason I chose this particular quote is because it talks about while working on a dream. I know that most of you here have the dream of becoming fluent in English, like I have the dream to become fluent in Spanish. And this quote can be very helpful for that. While you're working on the dream, remember to think of what it will feel like when you have achieved your dream and how grateful you will be. This has become a tool that I use in my daily life regularly now, but as a child and a young adult, this was completely foreign to me. Let me share a little bit with you about how Oprah influenced me when it comes to gratitude. Oprah Winfrey is an American TV talk show host and a philanthropist. And back in these times, in the late 90s, I was regularly watching her show called The Oprah Show. She started talking a lot about gratitude. I wonder if you can relate to a time when you heard about something and it seemed like a good idea, but then you heard about it again, and maybe again, and maybe again, and it started to sink in. Let me share a quote from Oprah. The single greatest thing you can do to change your life today would be to start being grateful for what you have right now. And the more grateful you are, the more you get. One of the reasons I chose this particular quote out of lots of Oprah quotes to choose from is because Oprah grew up in poverty, which means that her family had very little money. And she worked her way to the top, or in other words, she became one of America's most wealthy people. Now, being wealthy isn't the most important part of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, she says, the single greatest thing you can do to change your life today would be blah, blah, blah. She is somebody who knows about changing your life. All of us who want to be more fluent in a second language are looking for a change. And Oprah has some advice that we might want to think about. I can tell you from personal experience that not just what these two women have said, but the fact that I took what they said and what others said and started to put it into practice has changed my life. I started practicing gratitude the way these two women suggest, by making out a gratitude list. Every day I wrote down 10 things I was grateful for. And my challenge to myself was to write something different than I had written before. This is a great challenge that I'd like to give to you, and it will change your life no matter how you do it. If you want to do it and practice your English at the same time, then you can kill two birds with one stone. I have to give a little aside here. That isn't one of my favorite idioms, but it's very common and perfectly describes what I'm saying here. So another way to say that would be to say you can get two things done at the same time, which is you can have your gratitude list and write it in English. I'm going to give you some tips and ideas about doing that at the end of this video. I wish that I could quantify the change that this made in my life, but suffice it to say that before I started this gratitude practice, I was pretty miserable a lot of the time. After practicing gratitude with a gratitude list, I started to feel some hope. But I've got to admit, the real change happened for me when I started to share this gratitude with other people and talk to them about their experience with it. I'm not exactly sure when it happened in the process, but somewhere in the process, I started to feel grateful for feeling grateful. I mentioned this in the beginning. And the reason that this is so important to me is that sometimes when I was making my gratitude list, I was writing things down that I was grateful for, but I didn't really feel the feeling of gratitude. Maybe I knew I should be grateful for it. I had some things that maybe were cultural, or maybe they came from my family, that made me feel like I should be grateful for being able to breathe, for example. And of course, this is a great thing to be grateful for. But I thought, okay, yeah, I feel grateful for that. Yet I didn't actually really feel the feeling. What ended up happening is that as I continued to make this gratitude list and started to talk about it with other people, I started to really feel grateful for things that I knew I was grateful for before, but it wasn't the same. It's a little bit hard to explain. Can you relate to something like this that's difficult to explain? I think we all have at least one or two things like this. I still practice gratitude in my life every day. Yes, I do it in Spanish, and often I do it in English. I don't write it down as much as I used to. When my children were young, this was so important to me that I started a tradition with them to talk about the things we were grateful for at the end of the day when we were saying goodnight. Whenever I'm together with my children, I still practice this tradition with me, and whether they know it or not, it's one of the things that is closest to my heart. A few years back, a very dear friend of mine asked me to read another book about gratitude with her and to write down the things that we were grateful for. It was so powerful for me to start writing it down again that I did that for quite a while as well. I've heard so many ways to practice gratitude, and I'd love to encourage you to find whatever way might work for you. Before I get to the tips I want to share with you today about how you can use this video to improve your fluency, I'd just like to say that I really feel like gratitude has made such a big difference in my life. It would take me a lot of videos to tell you what my life was like before, but I can tell you that now I have a life that I love, working a job that I love, a family that I love, living in a place that I love, and feeling like my life is even more rich than I could have imagined before I started gratitude lists. I would love to hear your stories, whether they're about gratitude or something else that you thought of when you were listening to this story. Let me know in the comments below. Let's go ahead and jump into the tips and tricks I'd like to share with you today. There is so much that you could pick out of this video to practice, but I'm going to give you just a few ideas of things that I think will be helpful for you. So the first is a phrasal verb, to stand out. I mentioned that when I was reading the Simple Abundance book, the gratitude is what stood out for me. And what I meant is that's the thing that I noticed the most. Or I could say it's the thing that caught my attention. If something is different than all of the rest of the things, we can say that it stands out. The next phrase I'd like to point out to you is the phrase to get it. We use this phrase when we want to say to understand something or to really understand it on a deeper level or another level. So in the story, I said that I didn't get the piece about gratitude. When I was a child, of course I had heard of gratitude. Of course we talked about gratitude, but I didn't know anyone in my life who used gratitude as a tool to make their life better or who practiced gratitude on a daily basis. So even though I had read about it, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it at a deeper level. In about that same area of the story, I said that using gratitude in this way was foreign to me. So typically when we use the word foreign, we mean something that is outside our country. But in this case, what we mean is something that is completely different that we don't understand. So if I said that using gratitude as a tool was foreign to me, what I meant is it's completely different than any way I had heard of using it before. See if you can think of a way to use this phrase, or think of a time when something was completely foreign to you, but it's not necessarily something that was from a different country, for example. I said when I heard about gratitude from the book and from Oprah Winfrey's show, and then more and more things, it finally sunk in. This is another way to say that we understand it at a deeper level. If you think of the verb to sink, just by itself, it can be something like a boat can sink in water. But in this case, to sink in, we're talking about an idea that sinks into our understanding. One more useful phrase I'd like to help you understand, and then I'm going to give you some tips on how you can start using gratitude as a tool to make your life better. So I said that I wished I could quantify the difference that gratitude has made in my life. And then I said, suffice it to say, this is how my life is now. So when we want to quantify something, it means we want to give it a number, a way of measuring it. If we can count something, we can say there are 10 of these and we've quantified it. Or if we can weigh something, we can say there's 10 pounds of this and we give it a number. But the change that happened in my life can't be given a number. So I said I couldn't quantify it, but suffice it to say, in other words, what I'm going to share with you next is the best way that I can describe it. And that's when I told you that I have a life that I really love right now. Think of a time when you had something that was difficult to describe. Either you couldn't quantify it or it was difficult to describe in some other way, or maybe you just weren't free to say something about it. Maybe someone asked you not to tell certain things. Then you would say, suffice it to say something without giving the quantity, without telling the thing your friend asked you not to tell, without having all the information. This is what I can offer you. Suffice it to say. This is a great one to practice. See if you can practice this one and write your example in the comments below. All right, I said that I would share some tips with you about using gratitude. Gratitude is a great habit to nurture in your life, and you can do it simply by thinking of things that you're grateful for. Maybe you will give yourself a challenge for 30 days to think of 5 or 10 things that you're grateful for, and try to think of these things in English. And if you want to take a step further and get even more from your practice, try writing these things down in a journal. I have kept a gratitude journal many times in my life, and it has really been something helpful for me. If this video has been helpful for you, you can really help me out by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing so that you don't miss any more English lessons like this one. If you're ready to learn more about gratitude and what we mean if we say grateful or thankful, give this video a try. And if you want something a little different, YouTube has already picked this one for you. I'll see you in class. Bye.